Today I'm going to share 3 ways to make £10,000 a month in property and why you are frankly mad to not understand how these 3 things work. With these 3 things, I think you'll be surprised how little money you need up front to make 10k, 20k, even 50k a month if you really want to. And what I'll do is I'll structure each one of these to share what it is, what it roughly costs up front to get to 10k a month, and I'll also pepper in hot tips I've spent over a decade figuring out. Remember, I started my business with £1,500 back in 2012, and now I have a multi-million-pound portfolio and a property business that deals with hundreds of properties every month. I don't say that to brag to you, but to show you that if I can do it, you can too. Number 1 is property sourcing, and that is exactly how I got started in property many years ago. My property sourcing business now turns over between £1 to £2 million a year. But what is it? Property sourcing is exactly as it sounds, where you're sourcing a property for other investors to buy from you. If you're not that experienced in the property investment world, it probably is going to sound a bit odd why an investor would pay you to introduce them to a property you found out the blue. But let me explain 2 reasons why there's an advantage for an investor to pay you for an opportunity you found. Firstly, there are a lot of investors out there that are cash rich but time poor. So if you're time rich but cash poor, you can put your time to work by weeding through all those property opportunities out there, doing the legwork to view properties, negotiate offers so that you can help expose a diamond purchase from the rough. You're putting all that time in to deliver one great property opportunity an investor can buy very easily with little time needed from them. In exchange for a fee, they're paying for you. From an investor's perspective, they're paying to save time and still achieving a great property to purchase. They are leveraging your time to get them deals. From your perspective, you're leveraging your time to get their money. The second reason is there are, of course, a lot of investors out there that have time and have money, but are not going to be able to find every good opportunity. So if you can find an investor an opportunity they couldn't have found themselves, for example, a property in an area they want to buy, but you've secured a £20,000 discount, for example, the fact that they're then paying you 5k for it isn't going to matter, because after they've paid you your 5k, they've still secured a £15,000 discount on a property they wanted. Property sources don't like being labelled like this, but you're basically acting as an estate agent. But rather than an estate agent introducing everyday buyers to everyday properties to purchase as their homes, you're specialising in finding those 1% of great property opportunities for investors that can act quickly to purchase. Now, you need to remember that investors are not just going to buy any property deals from you. You've got to find property opportunities of value that are difficult to find just walking into an estate agent and asking for it. The sort of properties that are great for this are usually where sellers are willing to sell at below market value. So a property worth £200,000, for example, but the seller is willing to sell for 185. Now, if you're wondering why on earth would a homeowner sell you a property at a discount, then you need to check out my archive of other videos for an in-depth answer to that, because I don't want this video to go on forever. But the short answer is a seller is usually willing to consider a lower price if you can save them time. Selling a home takes time, it is stressful. So if you can find a seller that is valuing that speedier sale and therefore willing to consider a lower price, and pair that to an investor that can buy quickly because they're getting a better price and be able to make a fee in the middle, then you've created a win-win situation for everyone involved. Now, what does it cost to get started in property sourcing? Well, I mentioned earlier that property sources are in a way acting as estate agents, and the government agrees with that. A property sourcer is classified as a buyer's agent. So you are technically a type of estate agent which would fall under something called the Estate Agency Act of 1979. Basically, the long and short of this is you need to do all the same things an estate agency does to get set up. Now, that is probably going to sound like a lot of work, a drag, but honestly, it isn't. However, it would probably cost you about £1,500 to get the basics set up. Now, before I get into what those things are, the only moment you need to get these things in place is the moment you are actually charging someone to source a property for them. So there's nothing stopping you initially trying to find deals, prove to yourself that you can find good deals, find investors to purchase them. And the moment you do that, then get all of this set up before cash changes hands. But the moment this becomes a service you charge for, you need to, one, be registered with an accredited scheme. I would recommend the Property Ombudsman membership, which costs about £260 plus VAT, and there's a one-off membership joining fee of £70 plus VAT. Two, you'll need professional indemnity insurance and employer's liability insurance. Usually you get a policy that covers both those things. We pay a few grand a year for ours because we're a bigger business, but if it's just you, you're probably looking at about £500 a year, and you can often pay that monthly, for example. Three, because you're dealing with property, you need to be registered for anti-money laundering with HMRC. So you're looking at about £300 initial registration charge, then an approval test, which is a £40 charge per person tested. Then you'll pay an annual fee of £300. Now, don't worry about the approval test. It is basically there to make sure you're not a criminal or a person of concern. It's pretty straightforward. And four, finally, you need to register with the Information Commissioner's Office for GDPR. This is between £40 to £60 a year. It's pretty straightforward. Now, I know that all sounds a lot, but doing this would probably take a few hours of your time, spread over a week or so. And like I said before, if you've already found deals that you could sell for £5,000 a piece, you're not going to worry about that initial £1,500 setup. So in conclusion, to earn £10,000 a month, you'll need to find probably 3 deals in your first month that you can sell, more than cover the £10,000 you need, taking into account your costs and setup costs. That's easily done if you're putting the work in. And to put it into perspective, my businesses source anywhere from 100 to 200 properties from investors a month. The second way to make £10,000 a month in property is something called rent to rent. With rent to rent, again, it's exactly as it sounds. You're renting a property from a landlord to then rent it out yourself at a profit. Now, the great thing about rent to rent is rather than property sourcing where you are finding a deal and selling it, so every month you're having to hunt down deals to sell to make money, with rent to rent, once you've got one set up, it's essentially producing you recurring income month and month and month. Like property sourcing, people that aren't experienced in property find this all a bit odd. Why would a landlord rent their property to you so you can rent it out to someone else for more? Well, another description for rent to rent is actually offering guaranteed rent. Rent to rent and guaranteed rent are essentially very similar. They're the same thing. So a lot of letting agents actually offer guaranteed rent packages already. The advantage to the landlord is rather than dealing with the tenant, dealing with the maintenance of that, you're offering a landlord a simple alternative which you handle that all for them in exchange for a reliable guaranteed monthly rent. Because rent to rent is more a commercial agreement between you and the landlord, if you stop renting, the landlord can just take the property back from you with no drama. However, if they had a normal tenant in place that stopped renting it, stopped paying, then the landlord then has to go through the legal process to evict that tenant, which can literally take months. What you then do with the property, once you've rented it, is sublet it. The most profitable way to do this is short-term letting. So think things like Booking.com or Airbnb. The great thing about short-term lettings or serviced accommodation is you can typically double or even triple the typical earnings you can generate from a property each month. So if a landlord is renting a property for £1,000 a month normally, and you're offering a rent to rent where you're paying the same, but you're able to sublet it at £3,000 a month, you're clearing that £2,000 difference for yourself. And if you've ever come across the WeWork office space company, the multi-billion-dollar turnover shared office space company, they are basically doing the exact same thing. They lease or rent an office space, convert it into serviced office accommodation, and then rent that space out for more, pocketing the profit. Is exactly the same with rent to rent. Now, what does it cost to get started in rent to rent? Well, the main cost you're going to have with rent to rents is the same cost anyone has when renting a property. So let's imagine you find a great apartment to rent for £1,000 per month. You're going to need to pay a month's rent up front, plus probably £1,000 deposit again, so about £2,000 in total. You're going to need to furnish that property, so like a hotel, someone can stay there and have everything they need. That's probably going to cost another £2,000. So in total, you're probably going to need about £4,000 up front. So more than if you're property sourcing, but if you can then rent the property for £3,000 a month, which you should be aiming to do if you're renting it for £1,000, you deduct £1,000 rent, let's say £500 costs for bills, cleaning, things like that, you're probably leaving yourself with about £1,500 profit a month. So after a few months of renting the property, you're probably making even and breaking even and starting to make a profit. So once it's set up and you automate everything, it can become quite a good passive income where you're just making £1,500 a month profit. To get to 10k a month profit, you're probably going to need about 7 rent-to-rents like that. Now, of course, you might find ones that cost more and make you more, or cost less and make you less. But the good thing about rent-to-rent is you can start with one, then with the profit from that one, get started with a second, and so on and so forth. What you can also do is if you find a great rent-to-rent deal you don't want, you can sell it to other investors. But as I mentioned earlier with property sourcing, the moment you start selling deals, you need to be regulated as a property sourcer or buyer's agent. And the third way to make 10k a month in property is something called lease options. Now, this is very similar to rent that we just talked about, but the main difference with a lease option agreement is during or at the end of the rental period, you have the option to purchase that property at a pre-agreed price. And if you don't want to purchase it, you can just forfeit that right. So again, you might be thinking, why on earth would a homeowner agree to this? Well, there are quite a few scenarios owners may consider this, but a common one we come across is where an owner is struggling to sell the property. It's either empty or they want to move but they can't. This is especially common if the property has very little equity in it or is a negative equity. For example, if you can find a property on the market for £100,000 that's empty and the owner can't sell it, they have a £90,000 mortgage on it, and the property in reality is only worth 90 grand. The owner has the choice to at best sell the property and after all their costs probably even make a loss, or you can offer to take it off their hands, offer them a guaranteed rent for 5 or 10 years, for example, but on the basis that within that 5 or 10 years, they have the legal right to purchase the property for, say, £100,000. From the seller's perspective, you are ticking the box of allowing them to be done with the property day to day, have enough money coming in every month to cover any costs they have on the property, like, for example, mortgage and things like that. You've then got control of a property like you would have rent to rent to do exactly what you would do with a rent to rent strategy. So you can rent it on booking.com and so forth, but you've got the added benefit of being able to buy it at the 100k years later. Now, in reality today, there's no way you're going to buy it 100,000 when it's worth 90, but in 5 years or 10 years, the property may be worth 120 or 130 or 140. So all of a sudden you have the opportunity to buy a property for 100k that might actually be worth much more than that. Or if you don't want to buy it, you can sell that option to another investor to purchase. Now, in terms of what it costs to get started with lease options, well, it is pretty much exactly the same as it would be with a rent-to-rent strategy. So rewind to that to relook at what we went through there. But the main added cost beyond that would be you'd want a solicitor to manage the paperwork with the lease option itself. So you probably need to spend anywhere from £500 to £1,000 per transaction to make sure that it's done correctly so that you have the genuine legal right to purchase a property if you chose to. So in conclusion, quite frankly, if I could upload my knowledge to you right now, you would realize, like me, it's really is possible to get started in property with little to no money. The thing that holds people back is that knowledge, but more importantly, that confidence. I've spent over 10 years building my knowledge and confidence in property, and my hope with this channel is that I can help upload that knowledge to you for free. If I can do it, you can do it.